today I'm here in my capacity as the executive director of Wyoming Equality.
Completely different thing. Okay, so this is a little tit-for-tat argument that got started the other day, and you were mentioned, so I thought you have every right to come in and rebut. I had Stephen Jimenez on, author of the book of Matt, and he was explaining his book, and he said that you had said something about him. What was it? It was quoted in
I believe I called him a snake oil salesman.
Snake oil salesman. Yeah. You just should be more opinionated.
I just want to go like strong and hard on the fact that he doesn't know what a snake oil salesman. He's not from here.
Yeah, okay. No, that's true. They didn't have those in New York City. They had those in Wyoming.
We know what a snake oil salesman is in Wyoming. Okay, we know what they peddle.
What made you step out and call the man a snake oil salesman specifically? What's your problem with him or what he's done?
Oh, just the book is fundamentally untruthful. So that's my problem there. So I'm here today with our board member, Reverend Hannah Villeneuve, and we were having a conversation about how folks outside of Wyoming perceive the Matthew Shepard murder and how folks in Wyoming perceive it. Okay. And outside of Wyoming, there really isn't much traction for the Book of Matt, right? Right. But here in Wyoming, I think it has gotten some traction. And I just want to go on, I mean, this is kind of the first place I'm saying it. Okay. But I think there is an apology to offer, and I think there is a little bit of a mea culpa on behalf of in-state LGBT organizers. I have not engaged the Jimenez argument or any of the other ones for the last 20 years. For the last 20 years, I have not wanted to. And I mean, I've only been in my role at Wyoming Equality for the last 2 years. But I'm not alone in thinking that it was just a conversation that we did not want to descend to. I think that the rationale that Jimenez gave, that we were afraid of the truth, or that it was just too much honesty for us and we needed Matt to be a saint, that's hogwash. That's nonsense. That has nothing to do with it. It was just very painful. And it felt obscene to have to defend a murdered child. And I didn't want to engage in that. And so I didn't, and a lot of people didn't. And unfortunately, I think that gave room in Wyoming for that narrative to grow.
I think we've been, but you tell me if you think I'm wrong about this. We've been very careful, even during the Stephen Jimenez interview, but he was very careful to say, it's not a question of whether Matthew deserved what he got. Nobody thinks he deserved what he got. Sure. Everybody thinks the crime is horrendous. It's just a matter of, well, what caused it? What was the motive that's being discussed? And apparently discussing the motive can be upsetting to people. When he never deserved what he got, it shouldn't have happened. Yeah. But is it the motive then that's upsetting to people?
There's two things. One, he's a shoddy journalist, right? And what he represents as being factual and deeply well-researched. I think he says he's been here for 14 years. And like yesterday, I watched that interview and he rattled off, like, look at all these folks that I have interviewed. But he never called Aaron McKinney's attorney, who lives here in Cheyenne, and his number's in the book. That's the attorney who went to the hotel room to talk the Shepards out of the death penalty. He never picked up the phone and called him. He says he called Rob Debris. Rob Debris, who passed, but he had no record of that. He didn't call the law enforcement who did it. He didn't call the attorney. And I mean, this is Aaron McKinney's attorney. He would have, I think, still been defending his client. He probably would have said a lot of things that he liked. He didn't make that phone call.
Okay, but he did say that he was one of the few who had an interview with both Aaron and Russell. This is afterwards, and so he had an interview, and that's part of the book.
Yeah, and there was an interview done on Tuesday that will go up live tonight on the AP Wire. And because I was interviewed after the AP interviewed Russell Henderson, I had access to it because I needed to respond to it. 16 years later, Russell Henderson says he never met Matthew Shepard before that night. The entire fulcrum of Jimenez's book is that they knew one another. They did drugs together. They were sexually involved together. 16 years later, with nothing to lose, Russell Henderson says that never happened. Steve Jimenez is peddling Steve Jimenez's career. And I think it's offensive
Right.
for someone to come to our town and desecrate our dead. I watched, have you ever seen the movie Unforgiven?
Yes. Oh, that's a famous movie. Of course I've seen that one.
Yeah, it's a great movie, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember what happens when they kill Ned? Sorry, spoilers for folks. They kill Ned.
Yeah, who
they
haven't
kill
seen
Ned.
the movie.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Um,
Just ruined it for like 1,000 people. Okay.
I'm very sorry. It came out in 1992. Catch up,
should have
folks.
seen it by now.
But do you remember what happens when they kill him? What they do?
Mm-hmm. It's been a while, so go ahead, remind us. Well, you spoiled it anyway. Go ahead.
I've already spoiled it.
Yeah.
They put him out in front of the brothel.
Right. Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
And Clint Eastwood says, you know, like, you should know better. Don't decorate your saloon with my friend. And at the heart of the story, I mean, the story takes place in Wyoming, you know, fictional place, right? Big whiskey, but that's a Wyoming story of loyalty and friendship. Yeah. And what happens when someone desecrates that? Okay. I don't know what happened to our folks here in Wyoming where an outsider could come in, could desecrate a murdered child. Law enforcement could line up and say, we did our job. We investigated this. And some people will go against law enforcement and will go against a murdered child to prop up the career of this guy?
Grab your headphones real quick. Your phone calls are welcome. I do have one on hold right here. So if you want to go ahead and ask a question or make a statement to Sarah Burlingame, absolutely. Remember, the rules are she's here to give her side of the story. Be nice. This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
Miss Duncan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we didn't bring up the name of the lawyer that defended Russell and McKinney. His name is Dion Custis. And Dion was recently got in trouble for trying to bribe a witness.
Okay, that's a whole other story. If you have any questions for Sarah, 632-6500 is the phone number. I'm going to stick to the topic here. So let's go back then. Take a look at Mr. Jimenez for just a moment. One of the things he said when he was being interviewed here is, okay, and he says in his book as well, basically he's a New York liberal Democrat homosexual who came here to study the story and to go ahead and write a screenplay based on the point of view that is the one that's out there about it was a hate crime kind of murder, and says he found out something different, and that's why he wrote the book, is because what he found was not the story that he was told. And so your answer to that is?
Yeah, I'm going to let Reverend Hannah take that one. We've certainly had long conversations about members of our community.
Okay, go right ahead.
Who,
the ways in which we internalize stories about what it means to be gay, what it means to be queer, and that there's an urge within members of the LGBTQ community to sort of perform being a different kind of gay person, particularly among gay men, right, who sort of, because of their identities, sort of have the closest access to traditional power. There's a sense that one can disavow the rest of the community and elevate oneself, and that has to do with the ways in which we are deeply hurt and afraid of what happens to out queer people, right? And I think that, so I was 9 when Matthew Shepard was murdered. I didn't live here in Wyoming at the time, but I lived in a small city in Wisconsin. And it's it's frightening because you see, like, this is what happens to people who are out. This is what happens. And so the ways that those stories get internalized and then the ways we act them out as adults can be really hurtful, and that people's capacity to harm their own community, to protect themselves, is both, right, as a pastor, it's really painful to watch because you know that person is hurting, and if you come for the rest of our community, we're going to be upset because you are you're betraying the folks who you could be lifting up through your work. Okay.
I think Hannah has a really beautiful, like, theological framing for that. I just think he was raised wrong.
That's okay. Yeah. We'll just throw it into, he was just raised wrong.
Yeah.
It's AM 650 KGAB Radio or KGAB.com. My name is Glenn Woods. In the studio with me is Sarah Burlingame, who is talking about the book of Matthew and the Matthew Shepard story with a slightly different point of view. Grab your headphones there because you have a caller. This is Glenn, who's on the phone with us. And I don't hear him. Okay, if you want to try back. 632. Are they hearing? I'm not hearing them.
I don't hear anything.
Okay. If you want to try back, 632-6500 or outside Wyoming, 888-503-6500. This is the 20th anniversary. Is it today? Am I getting that right? Okay, of his death today, yeah. And so, my concern, just so you know, putting Stephen Jimenez's book aside for just a moment, is I sit here every single day, like 4 hours a day, and I talk about different news stories, and I want to just make sure that we're getting some kind of a balanced approach so we can make a decision, which is why I had Mr. Jimenez on, which is why I'm having you on. So you on, I said that wrong. So with that in mind, when you look at that kind of a coverage, does it concern you that in the state of Wyoming that we've only had a one-sided coverage, where there's one narrative, and when someone comes out with a different narrative, that it's that upsetting to people?
Sorry, so in your perception, in Wyoming, we've only had one side of the narrative, and
to
it's
me,
been one.
yes, but again, correct me if I'm wrong. To me, it seems like there's just one story.
I'm going to correct you.
Okay, go ahead.
That wasn't my sense of it at all.
Okay.
I mean, so we moved here in August of 1998. Matthew was found in October. And I had a subscription to the Tribune Eagle at the time.
Right.
I ended up canceling it because I found the coverage of it and this sort of prurient sort of like, yeah, but what kind of guy was Matthew Shepard? Like, did he maybe did the whole drug end of it and the meth and so on in those stories in the Tribune Eagle? I can't remember. It was 20 years ago. I honestly don't remember. But I know, like, I just had this feeling like, good heavens, you cannot swing a cat without running into someone who is who knew two of the, murderers in some way. I was at a craft fair and I was talking to this woman and, this is, really sad. It's really horrible. And she started saying like, yeah, but, Aaron, he had a rough life. And I was like, sure. Right. And a kid is murdered. And she was like, well, we all should have done more for him. There's a tremendous amount of guilt. There's a tremendous amount of shame, I think, that's attached to that. And of course, after the fact, it turns out that, the woman at the craft fair was his aunt. Okay. And it felt so omnipresent at the time. And there was all of this sort of, yes, it happened. But the national media came in so fast and so hard, and I think shocked folks into this, like, well,
not used to that here. Not used to that here in Wyoming.
What was the thing you said earlier, Hannah, about?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the thing I said earlier was.
It happened.
That it could have happened anywhere, because I think I remember distinctly that feeling. In Wisconsin, the sense that like. This kind of thing could have happened where I lived. It could have happened anywhere, and yet it did happen here. And so it's sort of finding the way to not suggest that this is somehow like a uniquely Wyoming problem, like we're the only state where violent homophobic crimes happen. And
part of the perception that people of Wyoming worry about, that this is uniquely a Wyoming thing. They don't want that reputation.
And it did happen here, and I think that. Part of that has been an opportunity to advance the dialogue, and that through this horrific and grisly murder, these places and the people that I am here to serve in ministry have had to have a much harder conversation about what it means to live and let live around issues of LGBTQ equality than other places have, but like we have to grapple with it here because it did happen here, and there's no way to change that, even if it could have happened anywhere.
Let's grab those headphones again. Let's try it again with the phones. This is Glenn, who's on with us. You got to turn your radio down. The delay will just confuse you.
It did happen here.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, we're having problems. I'm sorry, ladies. We're having problems with this. If you want to try back, 632-6500 is the phone number. These ladies are willing to take some questions from you. That's just fine. But you've got to turn your radio down because the delay is really going to confuse you. Back we go to the interview. Yeah, well, this is where call screeners come in. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that, like, I mean, you look at the folks like myself. Yeah. You look at the folks like our outgoing chair, John King, who's a pilot here in Wyoming, and who was going to come out in 1998. And when Matthew Shepard was murdered, he went back in the closet and he stayed in the closet for 15 years. You look at the effect that it's had on him. But you look at his character, you look at my character, Jason Marsden, who was a Casper reporter. and has become the, the director of the Matthew Shepard Foundation. I'll stack our character and our integrity up against Steve Jimenez's any day of the week.
Okay.
He came to the city council and said, we're going to be Skyping in Russell Henderson on the anniversary of his murder. Come and see it. Like it was a game show.
Mm-hmm.
That's gross.
Okay.
Like, who does that? And then when he was told no, when the Department of Corrections, turned down his request, he took out an ad on Facebook saying, Russell Henderson is going to be streamed in. You don't want to miss it. He knew he wasn't. He knew it had been denied. He said it anyway. He took an ad out in the Boomerang saying, you don't want to miss this. There's going to be video of Russell Henderson, knowing that people would think that the Skyping was still happening. That's not somebody you should trust. It's just not.
Okay, last attempt at the phones, and I give up
All
on
right.
you guys. You guys out there have to get it right. This
Turn
is
your
Glenn.
radio down.
Who's on the phone? Okay, we're still doing this. I'm done with the phones over there because somebody out there is trying to call in, and you don't know to turn down your radio. So let me ask you this: you are part of. Let's talk about the organization that you work with, and let's not forget we had to prompt her on this.
Yes.
The website address is.
Oh, good gravy.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a pay doc now because you had to prompt me. www.wyomingequality.org.
Okay.
And if I say /donate, then maybe I'll be back in my board's good graces.
Not a chance. So, okay, let me ask you this. What exactly does the organization do? What's the purpose of the organization?
The purpose of Wyoming Equality is to advocate for the LGBTQ community, plain and simple. We believe that this murder happened in part because the folks who did the murder, they heard conversations in their churches.
Yeah.
They heard conversations in their schools and at the dinner table that reflected that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, two-spirit folks, our lives don't have the same value. They don't have the same worth as everybody else. That we were something to be violently opposed to. And that conversation has to change. And it has been, I think.
Okay. Well, and there's a lot of work that goes into changing a conversation. So the organization works to change the conversation. How? What are there activities or events that you hold? How do you do that?
So one of the things we do is just social events.
Yeah.
Like we do rendezvous every year. This year we had almost 500 people. Had 6 more people come, we would have had 500. So those 6 lazy people who did not show up
Don't
really
look at me. I didn't know the event was happening.
You're invited.
Okay.
500 gay people in the woods of Wyoming.
Okay.
There is no other party like it.
True.
So we do rendezvous, we do dances and drag queen bingo around the state, and all of that, has been since our inception. We've been around for 30 years, and it sounds really bleak, and I like to think it's not as bleak as that. But finding a way for folks to socialize and to connect, to have fellowship together. It's also part of an anti-suicide initiative, right? Like we know that LGBT folks have a higher rate of suicide, of isolation, of violence, particularly trans women.
I got 2 minutes, so let me jump in on that. So between the suicide rate, which is also a high Wyoming suicide rate, and you wanted, we have to prompt her, she forgets things, to bring up meth as well. So let's put all of that together then.
I did want to bring up meth. I mean, if you're listening to this, raise your hand if someone in your life, your family, or your job has ever gotten involved with meth in Wyoming.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of hands are going to go up. Keep your hands up if they were murdered for it. I think all the hands just went down. We know what meth looks like in Wyoming. The Department of Health and some other folks have done a really good job educating and campaigning around what meth in rural America looks like. And we've seen it. We've seen, the stovepots. We've seen the kit and the gear and the Robitussin and everything else. Well, when Matthew was murdered, the FBI and these forensic auditors came in and they went through every scrap of his apartment, of his car. They didn't find any meth. There's no such thing as a meth dealer who doesn't have meth. There's no such thing. He wasn't a meth dealer. That wasn't who he was. We don't have to rely on anecdotes of people who are known traffickers of humans and deeply embedded criminals. We can look to our police reports. We can look to law enforcement who investigated this and say, hey, did you find this? No, they didn't. So meth is 100% a problem here. And it's one that, you know, I congratulate the state of Wyoming for being kind of an early adopter of seeing that, like, oh man, we are a petri dish for this epidemic with our boom and bust economy,
right.
You know, with the oil field bringing in high wages, nowhere else to spend it. It is absolutely a problem, but it wasn't Matt's problem.